The first rays of sunlight filtered lazily through the glass-paneled entrance of Crestwood Academy, gilding the polished floors with a faint golden glow. The air outside still carried the crisp bite of early morning, but inside, the long corridors buzzed with the familiar energy of teenagers starting another day they thought would be ordinary. Backpacks thudded against lockers. Shoes squeaked on the wax tiles. Conversations rose and fell like overlapping waves. Talk of unfinished homework, rumors about who liked who, and complaints about the mountain of assignments already piling up, though the term had barely begun. To most of these students, it was just another stop in the endless cycle of adolescence. Study, gossip, laugh, repeat. They shuffled through the halls, unaware that by the end of the day, their school would never feel quite the same again. Upstairs, the chemistry lab sat waiting, its rows of blacktop tables neatly arranged, each holding sets of glassware that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The faint scent of cleaning solution lingered, mingled with something metallic. A stack of fresh worksheets waited on the desk, the kind that usually meant another routine experiment. But this wasn't going to be a routine morning. This classroom was about to become a stage where arrogance would be stripped bare, and a truth long buried would be forced into the open. When the bell finally rang, the usual chatter dulled to murmurs as the door to the chemistry lab opened. In stepped Miss Celeste Ward. She wasn't like the other teachers at Crestwood Academy. Something about her presence seemed to bend the atmosphere the moment she entered. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to shout. Yet the scrape of chairs slowed, conversations died out, and eyes followed her as though pulled by an unseen force. She was in her mid-30s, not young enough to be mistaken for one of them, not old enough to fade into the background like some teachers did. Her movements were measured, deliberate. She carried herself with a posture so upright it looked as if her spine were carved from steel. And her eyes, those unyielding, steady eyes, seemed to scan the room as though she could read not just faces but thoughts. Miss Ward dressed simply but oddly, enough to spark gossip. She wore long sleeves no matter the weather, and her clothes were always neat, precise, almost uniform-like. In summer, when others sweated through light blouses, she arrived buttoned up, unflinching, not a drop of discomfort visible. Naturally, whispers trailed her through the corridors. Some students claimed she was divorced and bitter, hiding pain under her strictness. Others guessed she had no family at all, that teaching was her only life. A few, the more imaginative ones, whispered that she hadn't always been a teacher, that before Crestwood she had lived another life, one cloaked in mystery. But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop your country in the comment below and please like the video. Thank you. Now let's continue. No one had proof, just stories. Yet when Miss Ward's gaze locked on someone, the rumors felt possible. Even the school's loudest students sat straighter when she scanned the room. This morning was no different. She placed her books neatly on the desk, glanced over the worksheets, and then lifted her head. The room quieted without her having to say a word. "Open your notebooks," she said, her voice calm but edged with authority. "Today's experiment requires your full attention. If you are careless, you will not only ruin the results, you may hurt yourselves." The students obeyed, the scrape of binders and the rustle of paper filling the silence she had left behind. At the back of the room, however, one boy leaned lazily against his chair, arms folded, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't listening. He never did. And unlike the others, he wasn't unsettled by Miss Ward's piercing stare. Least not yet. At the far end of the chemistry lab sat Brandon Cole. He was the kind of student everyone at Crestwood Academy knew, whether they wanted to or not. His presence was like a shadow that stretched across the school, impossible to ignore. Tall for his age, with a broad frame from hours in the gym, he carried himself like he owned every hallway. His hair was always styled perfectly, his sneakers spotless, his clothes expensive enough that even teachers noticed. But it wasn't his looks or fashion that made him stand out, it was his name. Brandon's father was Victor Cole, a businessman whose wealth and influence had seeped into nearly every corner of the city. He sat on boards, funded campaigns, and donated to the very school Brandon now roamed. Whenever Crestwood needed a new facility or a renovation, Victor Cole's money was there, stamped with the family name. That kind of power gave Brandon a freedom most teenagers could only dream of. Teachers hesitated to discipline him. The principal offered warnings instead of punishments. Other students avoided challenging him because everyone knew what came next: humiliation. Brandon lived for it. He mocked the shy, shoved the weak, cheated without fear, and still smiled his way into top positions because no one wanted trouble with the Cole family. He was the storm in the hallways, loud, cocky, untouchable, and he thrived on it. As Miss Ward arranged her papers, Brandon leaned back, ignoring the bubbling solutions in front of him. His two closest friends, boys who laughed at every insult he spat, snickered by his side. He didn't bother lowering his voice. He never did. "Look at her," Brandon muttered, loud enough for half the class to hear. "Long sleeves in this heat. What do you think she's hiding? Scars? Tattoos? Or maybe she's just scared someone might notice she shops in the bargain aisle." His friends burst into laughter. The sound spread across the room like ripples in a pond. A few students laughed nervously, more out of fear than amusement. Others kept their heads down, hoping not to be noticed. Brandon loved this power, the way a single sentence could make an entire room tilt toward him. He thrived on the discomfort he created. But Miss Ward didn't react. She didn't flinch, didn't look at him. She calmly set a beaker on the counter, her voice steady as she reminded the class. "Your experiment requires focus. Pay attention to your measurements." That calm dismissal hit Brandon harder than any insult. She had brushed him aside, reduced his performance to nothing. His jaw tightened. A quiet heat crawled up his neck. Brandon Cole wasn't used to being ignored. The scent of chemicals soon filled the room, sharp, acidic, and heavy in the air. Students hunched over their stations, glass tubes clinking softly as liquids were measured, mixed, and stirred. A low hum of concentration settled across the lab. All except in the back corner. Brandon Cole lounged at his desk, arms folded. His eyes locked not on the experiment but on Miss Ward. His friends elbowed each other, waiting for his next performance. They knew the look on his face too well, the crooked smile, the narrowed eyes. He was restless. And when Brandon was restless, someone had to bleed, even if only with words. "Hey, Miss Ward," he called out, his voice slicing through the silence. "Quick question. Are you actually a teacher? Or are you just playing dress-up to cover the rent this month?" The words echoed. For a second no one moved. Then came the ripple, nervous laughter, low and scattered. Some students smirked, others looked down at their desks, their hands fumbling with glassware as though the reaction in front of them was suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. Everyone knew the pattern. Brandon provoked, mocked, and shredded whoever stood in front of him. And the teachers. They usually cracked, stammering, scolding, or pretending not to hear. Miss Ward didn't turn her head. She didn't so much as pause in pouring a clear liquid into a tall cylinder. Her tone was even, almost casual, but it carried across the room with startling clarity. "Focus on your experiment, Brandon. Your mixture is about to overheat." It was not just a dismissal. It was a dismissal wrapped in precision, cutting in its accuracy. The student's eyes darted back to Brandon's workstation, where indeed his flame was licking dangerously high beneath the glass. Brandon's grin faltered, then returned sharper. He hated it, being brushed aside like an unruly child. She hadn't stuttered, hadn't flinched. She had seen him, and dismissed him in the same breath. He leaned forward, his voice louder now, jagged with irritation. "Don't tell me what to do. You're not my boss. My dad pays your salary, remember?" The laughter this time wasn't nervous. It was sharper, harsher, students trying to cover their unease with amusement. The silence that followed was thicker than the chemical haze filling the room. Miss Ward finally turned. "Slowly. Her eyes locked onto Brandon's with a gaze so sharp it felt like it could slice through skin. The air shifted. Several students straightened instinctively in their seats, as if that stare had landed on them instead. Her voice was quiet, but it landed like a hammer. You might believe your father's money gives you control here, but in this room science and discipline rule. Down. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried a finality, a weight that pressed down on the space between them. For the first time in a long time, Brandon Cole felt something he despised. A flicker of unease. But unease never sat well with him. Not when his friends were watching. Not when the entire class was holding its breath, waiting for his answer. Pride was poison. And Brandon had swallowed too much to stop now. Brandon's grin twisted into a snarl. His pride, already wounded, now ignited into a burning rage. He slammed his notebook onto the table with a loud crack, the sound bouncing off the lab walls and making a few students jump. "Or what?" he snapped, taking a step closer to Miss Ward. His voice was sharp, demanding. "What are you going to do if I don't sit down?" The calmness in her gaze didn't waver. Yet beneath the quiet surface, a storm stirred. A storm Brandon would never see coming. The class seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. Even the bubbling solutions, the glassware, and the faint hiss of gas from an open Bunsen valve faded into the background as the room waited for what would happen next. Blinded by arrogance, Brandon took the step no student should ever consider. With a surge of reckless force, he lunged forward, his hands closing around her throat. He shoved Miss Ward hard against the counter, glass beakers rattling, papers scattering to the floor. A chorus of gasps erupted. Chairs scraped against the tile. Phones wobbled in hesitant hands, half raised to record the chaos. For a single suspended heartbeat, time itself seemed to freeze. Brandon's chest rose and fell rapidly as he pressed harder. His smug grin replaced by a flash of anticipation. He was sure he had her cornered. "What now?" he spat, tightening his hold. "You really thought you could talk to me like that?" But Miss Ward's eyes didn't widen. They narrowed. Every muscle in her body, trained and coiled from years Brandon could never imagine, reacted with lightning precision. In one swift movement she seized his wrist, her grip like iron. His fingers faltered on her neck as shock raced through his veins. Before he could even recover, her other hand struck his elbow, twisting it unnaturally. A strangled yell tore from Brandon's throat, his hold slipping instantly. The students stared, mouths agape, unable to comprehend what was unfolding. Miss Ward didn't merely defend herself. She moved with a precision and control that no ordinary teacher could muster. Every step, every motion was deliberate, a dance of dominance and discipline that left Brandon off balance, vulnerable, humiliated. With a practiced twist, she spun behind him, locking his arm in a firm hold, and slammed him against the counter with enough force that the sound echoed like thunder across the room. Glass teetered dangerously but remained intact, as if even the instruments recognized the authority in the moment. "Apologize," Miss Ward's voice hissed, low and commanding, cutting through the stunned silence like a whip. Brandon thrashed, the fight in him raw and untrained. But the harder he struggled, the tighter her hold became. His friends, frozen at the back, gawked at the scene, their bravado evaporating into pure fear. No one dared move, speak, or intervene. Finally, the reality of his situation sank in. The boy who had laughed at rules, who had bullied and terrorized his classmates for years, was utterly powerless. Sweat streamed down his temple. His chest heaved. His voice broke as he muttered the words. Sorry. Miss Ward released him slowly, giving a controlled shove forward. Brandon stumbled, clutching his arm, his face pale, humiliated, the arrogance that once defined him stripped away in seconds. The classroom stayed frozen in awe. No one whispered. No one dared laugh. Every eye was locked on the woman who had, with terrifying skill, dismantled the untouchable Brandon Cole. The classroom was silent, but the silence was heavy, thick enough to press against the eardrums. The faint hiss of the gas valve and the clink of glassware became almost irrelevant compared to the weight of what had just happened. Every student's eyes were glued to Miss Celeste Ward, standing tall, her posture perfect, as though nothing had occurred. Brandon Cole was still crouched slightly, clutching his arm and trying to gather his scattered dignity. The arrogance that had been his armor moments ago was gone, replaced by fear, confusion, and a bitter taste of humiliation. Miss Ward adjusted the cuffs of her blouse calmly, smoothing the fabric as if she had just finished a routine task. Yet there was an edge in her eyes, a storm barely contained, one that spoke of experiences far beyond the confines of Crestwood Academy. No one dared breathe. For years, Brandon had believed himself untouchable. Money had protected him. Fear had reinforced him. But in those few seconds, he had discovered something even wealth could not shield him from: true authority, skill, and presence. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like steel. The words were not raised, yet every syllable struck with undeniable power. Even as she spoke, there was a flicker of something deeper in her expression. Her pupils hardened slightly, and her jaw set with a subtle tension that spoke of discipline forged in battlefields far removed from high school hallways. The students couldn't place it, but the aura was unmistakable. This was someone who had stared down real danger before, someone who had survived and thrived when others would have crumbled. A few students whispered nervously to each other, speculating on the teacher's past. Some said she had been in the military. Others guessed she had worked in law enforcement, perhaps even in covert operations. No one really knew, and Miss Ward gave nothing away. Her calm exterior concealed everything. Brandon finally straightened, the humiliation settling deep into his chest. He had fought bullies, resisted rules, and laughed at teachers before, but never like this. Never had anyone so completely dismantled his sense of control. Miss Ward turned her gaze across the classroom, meeting eyes without a single flicker of fear or doubt. The lesson was clear, unspoken yet unavoidable. Arrogance had limits. Power meant nothing in the face of skill and discipline. Respect wasn't given, it was earned. Then, with a finality that left no room for argument, she said, "Class dismissed." The students slowly gathered their belongings, each movement cautious, hesitant, as if they were treading around a force they didn't fully understand. Brandon left last, trailing behind his friends, his face pale, his ego fractured, his mind buzzing with questions he couldn't answer. As the door clicked closed behind them, a low murmur began to grow in the emptying hallway. Whispers of "Did you see that?" and "She wasn't just a teacher," spread like wildfire. The legend of Miss Celeste Ward, the strict, mysterious woman who had reduced Brandon Cole to nothing in mere seconds, was born. Deep inside, Miss Ward allowed a small exhale, not of relief, but of acknowledgement. She knew the storm she had just weathered would ripple far beyond this classroom. Crestwood Academy would no longer see her as merely a teacher. They would see the truth, slowly, and perhaps never forget it. And as Brandon Cole nursed his bruised pride down the hallway, Miss Ward's past, long hidden, dangerous, disciplined, remained just out of reach of those who might try to understand it. It was a past that had prepared her for moments like this, moments where arrogance met someone unshakable, and the lessons learned would last a lifetime. The bell rang, but the sound barely registered in the heads of Crestwood Academy students. Silence had settled like a thick fog, heavy and unbroken. One by one, the students packed up their belongings, their movements cautious and slow. Every glance darted toward Brandon Cole, who now shuffled through the room, his pride shattered, his arms sore, his confidence crushed. The whispers began almost immediately. "Did you see what she did?" one student muttered. He didn't stand a chance." Another nodded, voice trembling slightly. "She's not just a teacher. She's dangerous." Even outside the lab, the story traveled faster than any rumor before. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, through the classrooms, Brandon's humiliation was repeated again and again. Students who had once feared him now looked at him differently, hesitant, cautious, even wary. He had ruled the school with arrogance, but in a single moment, that power had been stripped away. Miss Ward's presence became a topic of hushed fascination. Her colleagues whispered among themselves about her unflinching composure. Some speculated about her past, military covert operations, law enforcement, but no one had proof. All they knew was that she commanded respect without demanding it, and she had just proven beyond any doubt that money and influence were meaningless in the face of true skill. For Brandon, the lesson was stark. No longer could he rely on his father's wealth to protect him. No longer could he intimidate teachers or students without consequence. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be powerless. The arrogance that had been his shield had shattered. For the students, the event became a story to retell, a benchmark for respect. They learned that wealth and privilege could bend rules but could not buy authority where real skill and discipline existed. Miss Ward returned to her desk, adjusting her sleeves with calm precision. Her eyes swept the room once more, noting the lingering fear and newfound respect. She had faced a challenge, maintained control, and reminded everyone that true power is quiet, measured, and undeniable. And so, the lesson spread silently, yet effectively. Arrogance can be broken, pride can be humbled, and hidden strength always reveals itself at the critical moment. At Crestwood Academy, no one would ever look at a classroom or a teacher the same way again. Money might buy influence, might even intimidate a few, but respect, true respect, that had to be earned. And Miss Celeste Ward had just earned it, not by threat, not by intimidation, but by action, precision, and unwavering calm. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more moments that will leave you on the edge of your seat, don't wait. Hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community of story lovers, and never miss a tale that proves lessons aren't taught, they're earned. Smash the like button if you felt the tension, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about courage, respect, and hidden strength. Your support helps us bring more incredible stories to life, so don't hesitate. Subscribe today and be part of the journey.